Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I have a presentation to present here with Emyria, a wonderful company that's hitting some fantastic runs and with a great growth outlook ahead. Conducting the presentation today is the Executive Chairman, Mr. Greg Hutchinson, and he will be supported here by the Chief Operating Officer, Marianne Rennie. We'll have some questions at the end of it, so please feel free to ask those. I'm going to hand it over to Greg to give a little bit of an overview of the psychedelics in the market at the moment and the great opportunities, and why Emyria is leading the charge in that sector. So over to you, Greg.
Thanks, Peter, and welcome everyone to this Emyria update. It's really great that we've got this opportunity to talk about some of the exciting things that we've been up to over the course of the last quarter and indeed even the last weeks. And what we've been building, and perhaps give everybody a few insights into what's to come. Clearly, there's been a lot of global acceptance of psychedelic therapies, and possibly you've seen some of that press even over the last 24 hours. So this is a very timely update. I've been in the chair role since November 2023 and the executive chair since the start of this year. For those who don't know me, I'm a 35-year veteran of owning, building, managing and running healthcare and medical clinics. 18 years ago, I became a shareholder in 4 loss-making occupational medical clinics in Perth, and with a team turned that around pretty quickly into a national network of 14 very successful clinics over the course of 3 years, which we then sold into Sonic Healthcare. I stayed in Sonic for 15 years and helped grow that to become the largest player in its field, with over 1,200 staff, 400 doctors, psychologists and other allied health professionals, servicing major government contracts, including with the Australian Defence Force and Services Australia, as well as a myriad of large and small corporate clients, including BHP, Rio Tinto and Chevron. I've now left Sonic and am very focused on Emyria, a company and cause about which I'm very passionate. It's probably fair to say that Emyria has gone through several pivots over the course of the past 6 years, and to me, each iteration has built upon the foundations that were built before. And the path that's been trodden, I think, is what makes Emyria uniquely positioned to execute on its mission, a mission that will see our mental health practitioners facilitate literally thousands of Australians to enjoy life as it's meant to be lived. Fair to say that the last quarter has been very successful. In fact, this week's been really successful from an Emyria perspective. We've undertaken a very successful and oversubscribed raise, had some money in the bank, which is terrific. We've seen a 12-month high in the share price this week off the back of an announcement we put out Tuesday, and hopefully you've all had an opportunity to read that and see the increased growth and demand that we've seen as a consequence of the Medibank deal that we've done and of our foray into Brisbane. Possibly even more pleasing is the fact that we've had such high volume and high trades. It's been outstanding and demonstrates that there's a lot of eyes on our stock at the moment. And as somebody who likes to put their money where their mouth is, I am the single largest shareholder on the register. That's something that I'm very proud of, and something that I'd like to see obviously realised from a financial standpoint myself, as well as for all of our shareholders. Whilst Emyria has been doing extremely well over the course of the last while, there are a huge number of Australians who aren't doing so well. And we can see here from this graph that mental health is Australia's #1 chronic health problem. I like to do a comparison with cancer treatment, because the prevalence of cancer within our population, in other words, the number of people who are living with cancer at any one time, has plateaued over the course of the last 15 years, largely off the back of new technologies, new treatments, new therapies that have been developed over that period. Unfortunately, the same can't be said for mental health. And as the Bupa CEO has said, mental health prevalence, the prevalence of mental health issues in our community has now reached pandemic levels. There has not been a single new treatment developed for depression and anxiety over the course of the last 15 years. But it's not just the individuals and their families who are finding things difficult. This is causing a significant and a significant economic burden. Last year alone, Medibank Private, our largest private health insurer, spent $219 million on mental health hospitalisation alone. Department of Veterans Affairs spent $300 million on veteran mental health last year and every year. And our life insurers have spent $2.2 billion in the last year alone on mental health related disability claims. Clearly, what we've been doing isn't working, and we need new and novel approaches to combat this, metaphorically speaking, hemorrhaging condition.
Thanks, Greg. And on that note, fortunately for Australia, in July 2023, Australia made a pretty bold move, becoming the first jurisdiction globally to reschedule 2 promising treatments for serious mental health conditions. This rescheduling allows authorised psychiatrists to now prescribe the drug MDMA in combination with therapy for the treatment of PTSD and the drug psilocybin in combination with therapy for the treatment of resistant depression. Now, this decision wasn't made lightly. It was made off the back of clinical trials data that came out of the US, which showed very promising outcomes from these medications in combination with therapy. Now, it's worth noting that Australia is still, to this date in 2025, the only country globally to allow these treatments, meaning that Australia and Emyria are uniquely positioned now to be global leaders in the delivery of these. So just talking to the total addressable market here. Now, this slide only depicts PTSD. 1.5 million Australian adults suffer from PTSD, of which approximately 600,000 would be deemed to be eligible for MDMA-assisted therapy. Now, if you then break that down and you look at only early target markets, just those with hospital insurance or those who are veterans or those who have had a mental health-related workers' compensation claim, you can see the market is significant in terms of patient numbers. And it's also worth noting, this is intensive therapy with medication, and these are therefore expensive treatments. So typically $33,000 for PTSD treatment. Moving on to the next slide, and we're looking at the total addressable market for treatment-resistant depression. So 1.1 million adults in Australia suffer from major depression. And again, approximately 400,000 would be considered eligible for psilocybin-assisted therapy. And again, if you look just at the early target markets, those with hospital insurance, those who are veterans, or those who have had a mental health-related workers' compensation claim, the market is significant in terms of patient numbers, with treatment fees typically being $22,000. Now, the difference in treatment fees for PTSD and resistant depression come down to the treatment cycles. Typically, for PTSD, you're doing 3 treatment cycles, and for treatment-resistant depression, you're doing 2 treatment cycles. So moving on to the next slide. Emyria has always had an interest and focus in emerging treatments and learning from patients, being innovative and developing IP. And through this and our clinical trials foundations, we've developed a really unique skill set, which allows us to become world leaders in psychedelic-assisted therapy, which is actually very difficult to coordinate and deliver. So what this picture is representing is all the pieces of the puzzle that you need in place to make sure that you can deliver it. You need fit-for-purpose facilities that are suitable to conduct these treatments. You need a proven clinical model. So a detailed protocol needs to be developed that needs to be approved by the ethics committee and endorsed by the Therapeutic Goods Administration. You need authorized prescribers. So these are psychiatrists with appropriate experience and training, and you need to have appropriate supervision programs in place for them. They need to then be approved by the TGA before they're allowed to actually prescribe these medications. You need skilled therapists because they do a significant amount of this treatment, around 90 hours in combination. These skilled therapists are typically clinical psychologists, mental health social workers, counsellors by qualification, who have a trauma-focused treatment background and who have also been trained in psychedelic-assisted therapy, which we deliver in-house. And then additionally, you need secure drug supply that complies with all of the TGA requirements. Typically, the sources have actually have been limited and come from overseas, but what we're seeing now as demand is increasing, that drug supply is improving with local manufacturing also being established. And then the final piece of the puzzle, and the biggest piece of the puzzle to ensure widespread accessibility, is you need third-party funding. So as you can see, or as you have seen, these are expensive treatments for individuals, and third-party funding allows access for those individuals who need it most. Excitedly, Medibank recently embarked on this funding, being the first private health insurer and partnering with Emyria first. And notably, Department of Veteran Affairs has said that they will fund these treatments for their members. Now it's about working on further funding avenues to ensure that accessibility for these treatments continues. Just to give you an idea, because we get asked this question a lot, what does a treatment model actually look like? So an individual will be referred into for the program. We'll then go through a rigorous screening process, which involves a couple of different medical practitioners. They then need to be signed off by the authorized prescriber as deemed eligible for these treatments. After that, you will likely need to go through some type of medication tapering. If someone's using antidepressants, they'll need to come off those. That needs to be a very thoughtful process. And then move into preparation in preparation for their active treatment protocol. Once they actually move into that active treatment stage or treatment cycle, typically 3 cycles for PTSD, as I said before, and 2 cycles for treatment-resistant depression. What this cycle actually looks like is an 8-hour dosing day where you take the medication and you have 2 therapists with you in the room for that whole day. After that first dosing day, you then come back for 3 follow-up therapy sessions. And then you do that, as I say, 3 times for PTSD typically and 2 times for psilocybin. And then we follow the patient for 1 year post-active treatment to monitor their progress and capture important data, which we learn from to improve our protocols progressively all the time. And you'll see some of the data in the following slides. So this slide is a case study. It's one individual who's received treatment from us. We're going to call her Kate. Kate has been known to us for 5 years. She's had PTSD from cumulative workplace traumas. She's a first responder as a paramedic. Now, as measured by PCL-5 scores, which is a validated questionnaire to track PTSD symptoms, anything over 32 indicates that someone has PTSD. From this chart, you can see her symptoms have progressively gotten worse over the last 5 years. That is despite her trying all forms of treatment to get better, but they didn't work and she was stuck. She was unable to work and had actually, by this point, applied for permanent disability, thinking she would never be able to go back to work. She commenced her MDMA-assisted therapy at the end of 2023. And as you can see, she's had really profound improvement in her PTSD symptoms, having a significant drop from where she started from, to the point that she's been deemed not to have PTSD anymore. Kate has now cancelled her permanent disability claim and is back at work part-time as a theatre nurse and part-time as a paramedic. So as you can appreciate, a significant turnaround for Kate in terms of her experiences day to day. And this is just one example of many that we have. So moving now more broadly to our data, This graph speaks again to the PCL5 questionnaires. As you can see, N equals 50 at baseline. So what this shows is that 80% of patients at the 6 month mark have a clinically significant improvement. This means a very meaningful improvement to their symptoms of PTSD. And amazingly, over 60% of them no longer meet the criteria for PTSD, meaning they're considered to no longer have PTSD. As you can see from the graph as well, notably, patients' symptoms still improve post their active treatment. And this appears to be coming from continued functional improvement. So, for example, mending relationships, reintegrating back into society, going back to work. These outcomes are obviously very promising, and we continue to monitor them closely. This final data slide is now actually comparing our real-world results to the clinical trials data that's come out of the US. That's the data I mentioned earlier, and it's the data that compelled the TGA to reschedule these treatments. What this graph is showing you is two things: that we are closely mirroring the results experienced from the clinical trials in the US, but our results now extend out to 6 months post-treatment, which shows sustained and durable outcomes post-treatment, which is again very promising to see. Other points of note just on this graph is that we've had 0% dropout rate for our program to date. Standard types of PTSD treatments and therapies can have very high dropout rates. So really positive to see that we've had 0 dropout rates.
Thanks, Marianne. I guess you can hear that we're pretty proud, and our practitioners are pretty proud of the results that we're getting. It's not just our practitioners and indeed our patients who are seeing these great results. Medibank's multi-year agreement with us, I guess, validates our protocols. And the fact that they've taken a leadership role in fully funding eligible members through our protocol is really significant. And we do have an expectation that this will be mirrored by other health insurers over time. They've uncapped the number of patients that can go through our program. Initially, it's just for PTSD, patients with PTSD, and those treatments have commenced in Perth, but we are expecting that other indications will also be funded by Medibank and indeed by other funders. If you move on to the next slide, Marianne, you've already talked about the fact that the Department of Veterans Affairs is looking and has made it public they will be funding veterans through these types of protocols. But we're also really excited about the workers' compensation arena, because if we go to the next slide, we'll see that, and this includes the case study that Marianne just talked about, of the 10 people suffering work-related PTSD conditions, none of whom were at work prior to treatment, every single one of them has returned to gainful employment. And we think that this will be really compelling from a workers' compensation, a compensable arena perspective.
Thanks, Greg. So these next few slides speak to our funded pathway pipeline. As you can see, we have one funded program in Perth for PTSD, and we're looking to add a funded program for depression as well, and activating funded program for our Brisbane sites. And beyond that, we're scoping other funded program for future sites, not only for PTSD and depression, but we're also looking at what opportunities may exist to extend beyond these indications. So, for example, the TGA is currently being lobbied to consider the use of psilocybin for those provided a terminal prognosis and coming to terms with that diagnosis. So, outside of that as well, there's a significant amount of research being done globally on different indications where it's considered these treatments may be effective, such as eating disorders, addictions, and the like.
So thanks, Marianne. I guess our intention is to make these programs more accessible to as many Australians as we possibly can. We've already set up in Perth. We've announced that we're setting up in Brisbane. Our intention is to set up in major capital cities in the next little while and then follow that with major regional centres. And we can do so in a relatively capital light fashion by creating relationships with our hospital partners and leasing beds from them so that we can set up at pace. So our growth strategy is relatively simple from there. At present, we have the capacity to dose 4 days per week. In other words, 4 dosing days per week. By the end of September, we will have capacity to dose 10 days per week. So that's 10 dosing days per week. And with the advent of the new clinic in Queensland or in Brisbane, and with expansion of our current Perth sites, we will have 35 capacity to treat or to have dosing days on 35 days in a week by the end of this calendar year. And of course, beyond that, we would see that we would look to increase that at pace over the course of next calendar year. So as investors and as shareholders, what should you be looking out for? In addition to PTSD, we would see that you'd be looking for an expansion of funded programs to include treatment-resistant depression and indeed other indications that may come along. We would be looking to see other funders funding our programs, and we've spoken today about workers' compensation insurers and with the Department of Veterans Affairs. You'd be looking to see that we've increased our capacity nationally via new site partners. And ultimately, then we would be looking to seek that we improve or grow utilisation across that capacity that we've created over the course of next calendar year in order to grow revenues. So why invest with us now? Well, it's clear that the country and indeed our company has first mover advantage. And because of our history and because of the inherent expertise that we have within the group, we're able to overcome the very high barriers to entry that exist in creating authorised prescribers across the country and in securing drug to be able to supply the demand that is there. And clearly there is, off the backing of Medibank Private and indeed other funders coming to the party, immediate growth potential. But there's no doubt that Emyria has had a great couple of months, culminating this week in the announcement that we put out regarding growing demand in Perth and, of course, our new clinic in Brisbane with our hospital partner there in Aviv. This is all great news, but my view is that we're very much infantile in terms of our direction. We are at the very beginning of this journey, and we hope to take you, our shareholders, with us on that journey over the course of the next few years. Pete, we might turn to questions if we have any.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Marianne. It's a pretty comprehensive and pretty clear presentation there. It's the investment opportunity, but also a pretty clear solution to what we all problem in society today, which is one which I don't think is going to diminish in the near term. We have a couple of questions that have come through. I'm going to just read out this first one, which you just mentioned on a little bit there. So this segues. Can you explain the hurdles to new entrants in greater detail?
Marianne, that might be one for you.
As in terms of competitors?
Competitors to the market. I think you explained quite clearly this has taken quite some time to get to where you are now. Can you perhaps go into a bit more detail into the hurdles that any other new aspirants might find?
Yeah, look, I think going back to, let me just see if I can get back to that slide as a speaking point, but it's a number of, sorry, bear with me. It's a unique skill set that you have to have, just in terms of, not only do you need to have the psychiatrist, so psychiatrists can go and they can achieve, look to achieve authorized prescribing, but it's all of the other pieces of the puzzle that you need to have in place to make sure that you can deliver this. So it does require capital outlay at the beginning. To get it up and running, you need to invest in training up your people and ensuring that you've locked down your drug supply, etc. So a number of different things there, and then accessibility for the individuals themselves. So being able to tie yourself to funding.
Can I perhaps chime in there too, please, Pete? Because look, there are a lot of psychiatrists who are really excited about the prospect of this treatment. It gives them a means of dealing with patients that they haven't had for the past 15 or 20 years. And otherwise, their patients just keep returning over and over without necessarily, as we've seen with Kate, improving to any great degree. But in order to be able to provide this particular service, you need to go through a lot of different hurdles, which your typical psychiatrist isn't willing to go through and probably doesn't have, in reality, the wherewithal to do. And that's where we come in. We can facilitate their entry into this market. And so we have a significant number of psychiatrists who are approaching us to be able to help provide this treatment to their patients. And we can set up the infrastructure for them to be able to do that.
And I'll just, one final point there, just going back to the total addressable markets and the early target markets, even if there are multiple players in the market, treating these individuals, which is great for patient access, there are a significant number of individuals suffering these conditions.
Yeah, there's a large addressable market, but there's also a very large immediate market there, which stood out from those slides. Just, I guess, moving on in that vein, Medibank and the Department of Veterans Affairs are two powerful stakeholders and wonderful certification for what you're doing. What the other insurers must be looking at this to see how this rolls out. This will long-term save them more money to treat people this way than to keep them on the insurance payroll for years and years.
Yeah. Are you okay if I take that one, Marianne? Look, there are different drivers for the different funders. As you could appreciate, that with the private health insurers, they typically see that they have a cohort of people who are what you might call frequent flyers. They're typically hospitalized twice a year for an average stay of 21 days at an average cost of $1,200 per stay. If you add up more and more people coming into that system, it becomes unsustainable for the private health insurers. Department of Veterans Affairs probably have a slightly different view of things. Yes, they're spending a lot of money, but there's just been a Royal Commission into veteran suicide. That's something that they obviously need to stem. And then if we look at workers' compensation insurers, they obviously want to get people back to work. So we think that we can facilitate an outcome for all of the different insurance bodies and obviously have a really strong outcome for the patients and their families themselves.
Thanks, Greg. One question here, a little bit more about the colour. Can you talk about the colour on a bit more colour on how you are thinking about profitability on a per centre basis as you build the number of treatments conducted in each centre? What does a break even look like for a centre?
It's a really good question, one we get asked regularly. We've actually broken this down even further because different clinics will have different number of beds and therefore a different number of dosing days available to us. So we're actually looking at a number of dosing days available across the country, and that'll be our metric as we scale that we look at and report back to the market. Now, we're obviously very early in this journey, and I would see that by the end of the year, we'll have a much better idea, not only of capacity, but of utilization. And it's then that we'll be able to come to the market and say, all right, well, this is what profitability looks like on a dosing bed or a dosing day. We've done some modeling, but it's, as I say, it needs to be validated. And once that's done, we'll be in a position to be able to communicate that to the market.
And Greg, the payback rebate process via Medibank, are patients out of pocket at all? And when are payments made back to the company?
Yeah, I'll ask Marianne to take that one.
Yep. There's the patients are out of pocket to actually come in and determine whether they're eligible, and then it's once they're on the program that they're funded. In terms of rebate back to Emyria, it's pretty standard. Once the treatment occurs, once the dosing cycle occurs, the reimbursement is, you put in your submission to Medibank and they reimburse it within a pretty, a time frame of a couple of weeks. Pretty standard for medical reimbursement.
And Marianne, as far as supply of patients, can you talk about the referral process from either psychiatrists, GPs, and also is there opportunity for self-funded, self-referred patients into that process?
Yeah, look, great question, Pete. We're getting referrals coming in from different avenues. So as you mentioned, psychiatrists, GPs, therapists are talking about this treatment. People are also independently calling up and self-referring. We do then get them to go and be referred by a medical provider, but that can just be going to your GP. So we're finding that our patients are finding us and coming in a number of different pathways.
And
perhaps I can sorry, Pete, just to expand on that a little bit further. There will be psychiatrists who don't want to participate in this protocol because it's too difficult or they like what they're doing on an everyday basis. But we are finding that we're getting referrals, not just from our cohort of psychiatrists, but from psychiatrists who don't necessarily want to provide the service themselves, but think that it will be benefit their patients. So they're referring in. Therapists are referring in, and as Marianne said, we're getting a lot of self-referral as well. But we'll always work with that patient's cohort of providers and practitioners to make sure that we have a multidisciplinary approach to that person's well-being.
And Greg, following on from that, Australia has approved these the psychedelic drugs for this clinical therapy process. Other countries in the world may not adopt that same process. Is there opportunity for people from other countries to come to Australia to rid themselves of a PTSD diagnosis or affliction?
Yeah, and look, that's already occurring. So we've had a chap from Florida, another one from Germany, and I think, Marianne, we've got another one coming in from Singapore. Medical tourism is something that is going to be a factor in this as long as other countries aren't providing this service, and we are. And that is something that we'll turn our attention to in good time. But at the moment, our domestic market is so large that we think we need to attend to the Australian public in the first instance.
And I think one of the final questions we can look at here, there's been some significant announcements made by the ASX recently about new clinics being opened and some strong numbers coming through the clinics already. What is your aspirational plan for the number of clinics to roll out, say, for the rest of 2025 and into 26?
Well, as I said earlier, we're not looking so much at the number of clinics, but more at the number of beds that we have, because each bed gives us a potential dosing day. And by the end of this calendar year, as I said earlier, we were looking to have 35 dosing days available to us on a weekly basis. Over the course of next financial year, will be determined, in other words, our capacity will be determined by the relationships that we eventually sign up with our hospital partners, and we're in discussions with them at the moment. Once they're signed up, I think we'll be in a much better position to let the market know exactly what we think will happen through the course of 2026. Marianne, did you want to add to that at all?
No, just I guess to touch on the fact that you said, we are looking to have a national presence, so setting up to make sure that we have clinics established for appropriate accessibility.
All right, well, I think that covers probably most of the questions that we had from our audience. And if there are some that you want to ask specifically, please email them in to peter@nwrcommunications.com.au. I'll forward them along to Greg and Marianne, who will answer those via email. Thank you for your attendance here today, everybody. Greg and Marianne, a great presentation, some great work and some milestones achieved. We've got some new shareholders who have joined the register recently and some older ones. Do you have a message to leave with them for the afternoon?
Just that I think, and thanks, Pete. Just that you know, we take our patients on a journey of discovery and enlightenment, and we really do hope to take all of you, our shareholders, on what we think will be a long and successful journey all of its own. As I said earlier, this is just the beginning.
Great. Well, thank you very much for the presentation today. Thank you for everybody for attending, and we'll make this video available for all subscribers. So check in on the website as well. Thank you very much.
Thanks
Thanks, everybody.